Islam is a holistic way of life, taking into account physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being, each a separate but overlapping part of the structure of a human being. God created us with a purpose, to worship Him, Quran 51-56, but He did not abandon us to a world of instability and insecurity. He gave us a book of guidance, the Quran, and the example of prophets and messengers to explain that trusting in God was the way for us to achieve success in this life and the hereafter. A Muslim spends his or her life endeavoring to please God by worshipping Him and obeying His laws, or rules. One of those rules is that eating pork, or pork products is forbidden. At first, one might wonder what harm could come from pork, a product eaten in many parts of the world, and the fact that pork contains parasites and diseases harmful to man may spring to mind as a justifiable reason for abstaining. However, when analyzing why Muslims are forbidden to eat pork, this becomes a secondary reason. Muslims simply do not eat pork or pork products because God has prohibited it. He has forbidden you only dead animals, and blood, and the swine, and that which is slaughtered as a sacrifice for other than God. Quran 2-173. Sometimes we may never know or understand why God has ordained some things and prohibited others. In the case of pork, no specific reason for the prohibition is given except in Quran 6-145 when God says, about the flesh of swine, pig, for that surely is impure. A Muslim submits to God's commands willingly, without needing to know the reason behind the divine rule. Moreover, God has expressly stated that a believer hears the words of his Lord and obeys them. We hear, and we obey. And such are the successful, who will live forever in paradise. Quran 24:51. When God and His Messenger have decreed a matter, they, the believers, should not have any option in their decision. And whoever disobeys God and His Messenger, he has indeed strayed into a plain error. Quran 33-36. A believer understands that God is the wisest and the most just. Therefore, His rules are designed to benefit us in our daily needs, be they physical, emotional, or spiritual. The Creator is acutely aware of the dangers of eating things that are forbidden and therefore, makes concerted efforts to seek out permissible food, even if it involves extra effort or expense. If a believer consumes pork unknowingly or by mistake, there is no sign of him or her. God does not punish anyone for lack of knowledge, nor unintentional mistakes or forgetfulness. However, if a believer is certain, or thinks that any pork or pork products may be in his food, drinks, or medicines, then it is not permissible for him or her to consume it. If he has doubts, then he must make an effort to inquire about the ingredients or ask for details. Nowadays knowledge about ingredients and the manufacturing process is readily available, and the prohibition applies whether there is a small amount of pork or pork products or a large amount. The scholars of Islam differ over the issue of whether or not changing the form of the impurity, in this case pork products, lifts the prohibition. The Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences thinks that changing the form, for example, food and medicine additives, so that it becomes something different, does lift the prohibition.
However, there is no doubt and no difference of opinion that it is forbidden to consume meat derived from the pig, including ham and bacon. The recent outbreak of swine flu in Mexico and North America led some countries to slaughter pigs en masse. However, there is ample scientific evidence to suggest that pigs harbor parasites that are harmful to humans, and the pig has long been considered the ideal breeding ground for influenza. Knows the best way for his creation to live in this world and prepare for the next. It is not permissible for a Muslim to consume pork under any circumstances except in cases of dire necessity, such as, if a person's life depends on eating it. In cases of dire necessity, prohibited things are permitted. God allows us to enjoy all the good lawful things and forbids us to partake of those things that may be harmful to our beliefs, health, well-being, or morals. Consequently, Muslims are in Part 1. We discussed the primary reason for Muslims abstaining from eating pork and pork products, and that is, that God has forbidden it. As the creator of humankind and all that exists, God knows what is good for us, and He has sent guidance enabling us to make wise decisions. Just as a computer would not work properly if it were incorrectly programmed, a human being is not able to function if he is not nourished correctly. Islam is a holistic religion that recognizes the interconnectedness of spiritual, emotional, and physical health. What a person eats and drinks have a direct bearing on their overall health and well-being. Virologists have long been aware that the pig is an ideal breeding ground for influenza, so it is no surprise that the latest threat, swine flu, originated in pigs. Microbiologist and immunology expert Dr. Graham Burgess says, viruses that would normally grow in the chicken can potentially grow in the pig. And ones that grow in humans will potentially grow in pigs. So, we consider the pig a great mixing pot for viruses, and this is where it can play a real role in generating new viruses. The pig is known to harbor parasites as well as bacteria and viruses. Cysticercosis is an infection caused by the pork tapeworm. Taenia solium infection occurs when the tapeworm larvae enter the body and form cysticerci, cysts. When cysticerci are found in the brain, the condition is called neurocystic urcosis. This tapeworm in pigs is found worldwide but is most problematic in poor and developing countries where pigs are allowed to roam freely and often eat human feces. This infection can occur even in modern developed countries, but the CDC reports that it is very rare in Muslim countries where eating pork is forbidden. 4. Trichinellosis, also called trichinosis, is caused by eating raw or undercooked meat of animals infected with the larvae of a species of worm called trichinella. Infection occurs most commonly in certain wild carnivorous meat-eating animals, but it may also occur in domestic pigs. The CDC warns that if a human eats meat containing infective trichinella cysts, the acid in the stomach dissolves the hard covering of the cyst and releases the worms. The worms pass into the small intestine and, in 1 to 2 days, become mature. After mating, adult females lay eggs. These eggs develop into immature worms, travel through the arteries, and are transported to muscles. Within the muscles, the worms curl into a ball and encyst become enclosed in a capsule. This infection occurs when these encysted worms are consumed in meat. The number of cases of trichinellosis throughout the world has steadily decreased due to an awareness of the dangers of eating raw and undercooked pork products and legislation prohibiting feeding raw meat garbage to pigs. 5. Pigs are omnivores, which means they consume both plants and animals. Pigs will scavenge and eat any type of food, including dead insects, worms, tree bark, rotting carcasses, garbage, and even other pigs. Pigs have very few sweat glands, so therefore they are unable to completely rid their bodies of toxins. New evidence indicates that farming practices are leading directly to the spread of human bacterial infections. Pigs often live in the small spaces and fetid conditions that exist in many modern factory farms, and studies are revealing that pigs frequently harbor antibiotic-resistant staph bacteria. This drug-resistant bacterium is now entering our food supply.
And recent investigations in the United States of America indicate that 49% of pigs and 45% of pig workers now harbor these bacteria, responsible for killing more than 18,000 people in the U.S. every year. 6 inches he has forbidden you only dead animals, and blood, and the flesh of swine. Quran 2-173. For that surely is impure. Quran 6-145. Muslims refrain from eating pork and pork products because God has forbidden them. However, a little investigation into the anatomy and lifestyle of the pig reveals that it is certainly an unclean animal. Those interested in consuming healthy, natural, and pure foods would do well to abstain from pork and pork products. Despite the Bible having been partially corrupted from an Islamic point of view, we as Muslims acknowledge that there is some truth remaining within the existing Bible as a testimony against those who have chosen to corrupt the Bible and violate Almighty Allah's 10 commandments and the rest of His rules. 34 Bible verses about pork. Deuteronomy chapter 14 verse 8. The pig, because it divides the hoof but does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you. You shall not eat any of their flesh nor touch their carcasses. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 7. And the pig, for though it divides the hoof, thus making a split hoof, it does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Isaiah chapter 66 verse 17. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go to the gardens, following one in the center, who eat swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice, will come to an end altogether, declares the Lord. Isaiah chapter 65 verse 4. Who sit among graves and spend the night in secret places, who eat swine's flesh, and the broth of unclean meat is in their pots. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 12. Whatever in the water does not have fins and scales is abhorrent to you. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 35. Everything, moreover, on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 8. You shall not eat of their flesh nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 27. If one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, eat anything that is set before you without asking questions for conscience's sake. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 3. Whatever divides a hoof, thus making split hoofs, and chews the cud, among the animals, that you may eat. Matthew chapter 8 verse 32. And he said to them, Go. And they came out and went into the swine, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. Deuteronomy chapter 14 verse 21. You shall not eat anything which dies of itself. You may give it to the alien who is in your town, so that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Acts chapter 10 verse 14. But Peter said, By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unholy and unclean. Matthew chapter 7 verse 6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you to pieces. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 9. These you may eat, whatever is in the water. All that have fins and scales, those in the water, in the seas or the rivers, you may eat. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 22. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 22. It has happened to them according to the true proverb. A dog returns to its vomit, and a sow, after washing, returns to wallowing in the mire. Romans chapter 14 verse 21. It is good not to eat meat or to drink wine, or to do anything by which your brother stumbles. Romans chapter 14 verse 20. Do not tear down the work of God for the sake of food. All things indeed are clean, but they are evil for the man who eats and gives offense. Matthew chapter 8 verse 31. The demons began to entreat him, saying, If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine. Colossians chapter 2 verse 21. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. Romans chapter 14 verse 3. The one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat, and the one who does not eat is not to judge the one who eats, for God has accepted him. Luke chapter 8 verse 33. And the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. Leviticus chapter 5 verse 2. Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether a carcass of an unclean beast or the carcass of unclean cattle or a carcass of unclean swarming things, though it is hidden from him and he is unclean, then he will be guilty. Romans chapter 14 verse 2. One person has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only. Exodus chapter 12 verse 9. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs along with its entrails. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 4. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with gratitude. Isaiah chapter 66 verse 16. For the Lord will execute judgment by fire and by his sword on all flesh, and those slain by the Lord will be many. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 13. Therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble. Daniel chapter 1 verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So, he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Matthew chapter 8 verse 30. Now there was a herd of many swine feeding at a distance from them. Isaiah chapter 66 verse 3. But he who kills an ox is like one who slays a man. He who sacrifices a lamb is like the one who breaks a dog's neck. He who offers a grain offering is like one who offers swine's blood. He who burns incense is like the one who blesses an idol. As they have chosen their ways, and their soul delights in their abominations. Mark chapter 5 verse 9. And he was asking him, What is your name? And he said to him, My name is Legion, for we are many. Acts chapter 10 verse 15 again. A voice came to him a second time. What God has cleansed, no longer consider unholy. Acts chapter 10 verse 11. And he saw the sky opened up, and an object like a great sheet coming down, lowered by four corners to the ground. Allah knows best.